Most people know the name. Most people know the broad outline. A Soviet dictator. Millions dead. One of the most powerful men of the 20th century. But knowing the name and knowing the reality are two entirely different things. The reality of Joseph Stalin, assembled from declassified Soviet archives, from the testimonies of survivors, from the documented records of his decisions and his actions across 3 decades of absolute power, is darker, stranger, and more psychologically disturbing than the broad outline suggests. It is a reality that includes details so specific and so revealing that they change the way you understand not just the man, but the entire system he built and the world he shaped. These are not rumors. These are not Cold War propaganda. These are documented historical facts, drawn from sources that have been examined, verified, and established by historians working with primary archival material across the decades since the Soviet Union's collapse made those archives accessible. Some of these facts are about political violence on a scale that challenges comprehension. Some are about the specific psychological character of the man who ordered that violence. Some are about the inner workings of a system so defined by fear that the people closest to its center of power were among its most terrified inhabitants. And some are about the specific moments when the full weight of what Stalin was and what he had built became visible with terrible clarity. All of them are true. Number 1, Stalin personally signed death warrants for approximately 40,000 people during the Great Purge of 1937 and 1938. These were not abstract authorizations of a general policy. They were lists of specific named individuals brought to Stalin for his personal signature, which he provided in sessions that sometimes processed hundreds of names in a single sitting. The documents bearing his signature are preserved in the Russian State Archive. Historians, including J. Getty and Oleg Klevniuk, have examined these records. In one documented session from December 12, 1937, Stalin and Molotov signed execution lists covering over 3,000 people in a single evening, after which Stalin's records show he attended a film screening at the Kremlin. He signed death warrants and then went to the movies. Number 2. The total number of people who died as a direct result of Stalin's policies, including executions, the Gulag labor camp system, deliberate famine, and deportations, is estimated by historians at between 6 million and 20 million, depending on the methodology used and the time period covered. The most widely cited scholarly estimates, including those produced by demographic historians working with Soviet census data and archival records, place the figure of direct deaths attributable to Stalinist repression and policy decisions in the range of 6 to 9 million for the period of his rule, with some estimates running significantly higher when indirect mortality from policy-driven famine and forced displacement is included. The 1932 to 1933 famine in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and other regions, which historians have studied extensively using Soviet archival records, killed between 5 and 7 million people in those years alone. Number 3. Stalin altered his own official biography and birth year. The historical record establishes that he was born on December 18th, 1878. The official Soviet biography that was distributed and taught throughout the Soviet Union gave his birth date as December 21st, 1879. The change moved his birthday 3 days and shifted the year by 1, making him appear younger. This deliberate falsification of his own biographical record, which was enforced throughout the Soviet system for decades, is documented in the archival research conducted after the Soviet collapse, and reflects the specific relationship to truth that characterized his management of information about himself and about Soviet history more broadly. Number 4. Lenin explicitly recommended that Stalin be removed from the position of General Secretary in his testament, the document he dictated in December 1922 and January 1923. Lenin described Stalin as having concentrated enormous power in his hands and expressed doubt that Stalin would always use that power with sufficient caution. He specifically used the word rude to describe Stalin's character and said this quality was intolerable in the office he held. This document was suppressed after Lenin's death. It was not published in the Soviet Union until 1956, after Stalin's death, during Khrushchev's de-Stalinization campaign. For over 30 years, the Soviet people were governed by a man whose predecessor had specifically recommended his removal, and they were not permitted to know this. Number 5. Stalin's first wife, Ekaterina Svanidze, died of typhus in 1907. By multiple accounts, including those recorded in the memoir literature of people who knew him during this period, Stalin was genuinely devastated by her death and reportedly said at her funeral that she was the only person who had warmed his stone-cold heart. He never spoke of her publicly again. His second wife, Nadezhda Alliluyeva, whom he married in 1919 when she was 17 and he was 40, died on the night of November 8th to 9th, 1932, from a gunshot wound. The Soviet official announcement described her death as illness. The historical consensus, based on archival research and the accounts of people present in the Kremlin in the period surrounding her death, is that she shot herself. Multiple accounts indicate that the evening before her death had included a public argument between Stalin and Nadezhda at a Kremlin dinner. She was 31 years old. Stalin did not attend her funeral. Number 6. Stalin had his own brother-in-law arrested, interrogated, and shot. Pavel Alliluyev, the brother of his second wife Nadezhda, was arrested in 1938 and died in NKVD custody, officially of a heart attack, though the circumstances of his death followed the pattern of other deaths in NKVD custody during the Purge period that historians have not accepted as natural. Alexander Svanidze, the brother of his first wife Ekaterina, and therefore the uncle of his own son Yakov, was arrested in 1937, shot in 1941 after reportedly refusing to ask Stalin for clemency on the grounds that he had nothing to ask forgiveness for. Maria Svanidze, Alexander's wife, was arrested and shot in 1942. Stalin's connections to his own extended family did not protect them from the system he had built. Number 7. When Stalin's son Yakov, his child from his first marriage, was captured by German forces in the summer of 1941, the Germans offered to exchange him for a senior German officer. Stalin refused. His reported response, reconstructed from accounts of those present, was that he did not trade marshals for lieutenants. Yakov died in German captivity in 1943, killed by German guards at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp in circumstances that remain somewhat unclear, with some accounts suggesting he deliberately provoked the guards who shot him. Stalin's second son, Vasily, was allowed to rise through the Soviet Air Force to the rank of general, a promotion that reflected his father's name rather than his military capability, and spent much of his adult life as an alcoholic. Stalin showed little personal warmth toward either surviving child. Number 8. The Gulag system, the network of forced labor camps that was one of the defining institutions of Stalinist Soviet Union, held at its peak in the early 1950s, approximately 1.8 million prisoners. Over the entire Stalin period, the historical research conducted using Soviet archival records, primarily by scholars including Anne Applebaum and the researchers of the Memorial Organization before its forced closure, estimates that approximately 18 million people passed through the Gulag system between 1930 and 1953. The death rate within the camps varied significantly across the period, reaching catastrophic levels during the war years of 1942 and 1943, when mortality in certain camps exceeded 20% annually. The Gulag was not simply a prison system. It was a significant component of the Soviet economy, providing forced labor for major construction projects, mining operations, and industrial enterprises across the Soviet Union. Number 9. Stalin was almost certainly aware of the coming German invasion in June 1941 and refused to allow his military to prepare for it. Soviet intelligence services received multiple warnings about Operation Barbarossa from multiple sources, including the Soviet spy Richard Sorge in Tokyo, British intelligence sharing derived from ultra-intercepts, and the Soviet military's own intelligence collection. Stalin labeled many of these reports as provocation and disinformation. He reportedly wrote on one intelligence report that this information is a British provocation and ordered his intelligence chief to find and punish whoever was spreading this misinformation. On the night before the German invasion, Soviet border units were explicitly ordered not to respond to what were characterized as possible provocations. The result was that the largest military assault in the history of warfare achieved near total strategic surprise against the country's defenses. Number 10. Following the catastrophic Soviet losses in the first weeks of the German invasion in June and July 1941, Stalin went into a documented period of psychological withdrawal at his dacha outside Moscow. The accounts of senior Soviet officials who visited him during this period, including Anastas Mikoyan and other Politburo members who came to the dacha to ask Stalin to lead the defense effort, describe a man who appeared shocked, who asked why they had come, and who displayed behavior consistent with a severe psychological crisis. The historical debate about the duration and depth of this withdrawal continues, but the documentary evidence, including the visitor logs for Stalin's Kremlin office, which show a gap in recorded meetings in the days immediately following the invasion, is consistent with accounts of a period of incapacitation. Number 11. Stalin's Order. Number 227, issued in July 1942 and known by the phrase "not one step back," established blocking detachments behind Soviet frontline units with orders to shoot any soldiers who retreated without authorization. The order explicitly stated that panickers and cowards must be liquidated on the spot and authorized the formation of penal battalions to which soldiers guilty of disciplinary violations could be assigned and deployed in the most dangerous sectors of the front. The blocking detachments, composed of NKVD troops, did execute Soviet soldiers who retreated. The historical research on the actual number of soldiers killed by blocking detachments, as opposed to those who were sent to penal units, is ongoing, but Soviet archival records confirm that the order was implemented and that executions of retreating soldiers occurred. The order was a response to the catastrophic defeats of the summer of 1942, including the fall of Rostov-on-Don. Number 12. Stalin's inner circle lived under conditions of sustained terror that shaped every dimension of their behavior. The documented accounts of Politburo members and senior party officials from the Stalin period, including the memoirs of Nikita Khrushchev and Anastas Mikoyan, and the accounts of others who left records of this period, describe an atmosphere in which no one in Stalin's presence felt safe. Late-night dinners at Stalin's dacha that lasted until the early morning hours were not voluntary social occasions. Attendance was effectively mandatory, and the specific dynamics of these gatherings, including Stalin's habit of humiliating guests, testing their loyalty through provocative statements, and watching their reactions with evident attention, were a form of psychological control. Multiple accounts describe Politburo members going home from these dinners, uncertain whether they would be arrested before morning. Number 13. Vyacheslav Molotov, Stalin's foreign minister and one of his closest and most loyal associates, signed the execution orders for thousands of people during the Great Purge. His wife, Polina Zhemchuzhina, was arrested in 1949 on charges of being a Jewish nationalist. Molotov abstained from the Politburo vote on her arrest rather than voting against it. He did not ask Stalin to release her. She remained in a labor camp until Stalin's death in 1953. When Khrushchev informed Molotov after Stalin's death that his wife had been released and rehabilitated, Molotov reportedly wept. He continued throughout his long life to speak of Stalin with reverence and to defend his historical legacy. He died in 1986 at the age of 96. Number 14. The scale of the Great Terror of 1937 and 1938 was so extreme that it consumed many of the people who were operating it. Genrikh Yagoda, the NKVD chief who had managed the early purges, was himself arrested in 1937, tried in 1938, and shot. Nikolai Yezhov, the NKVD chief who presided over the most intensive phase of the terror and whose name gave the period its Russian name of Yezhovshchina, was himself arrested in 1939, tortured, and shot in February 1940. He was so thoroughly erased from official Soviet history that photographs in which he appeared alongside Stalin were doctored to remove his image, creating the now famous before and after photographs that have become one of the most striking visual documents of Stalinist historical falsification. Lavrentiy Beria, who replaced Yezhov, survived Stalin and was shot in 1953 by the post-Stalin leadership. Number 15. Stalin's relationship with truth as it was recorded in historical documents was entirely instrumental. The systematic falsification of Soviet history under his direction was comprehensive and went far beyond the suppression of political opponents' contributions. Photographs were altered, documents were destroyed, archives were restricted, encyclopedias were updated with new entries replacing those of arrested individuals, and subscribers to the Great Soviet Encyclopedia received instructions and razor blades in the mail to cut out pages featuring entries on purged figures and replace them with updated pages. The Soviet Union under Stalin was a state in which the historical record was treated as a malleable resource to be shaped in accordance with current political requirements, and the physical destruction of historical evidence was a routine administrative practice. Number 16. The Katyn massacre, in which approximately 22,000 Polish military officers, police, intellectuals, and other members of the Polish elite were shot by the NKVD in the spring of 1940, was ordered by Stalin and authorized by a Politburo resolution signed by Stalin, Voroshilov, Molotov, and Mikoyan. The Soviet Union denied responsibility for Katyn for decades, blaming the Germans. The documents authorizing the massacre, including the Politburo resolution bearing Stalin's signature, were found in the Soviet archives and were formally acknowledged by the Russian government in 1990. For 50 years, the Soviet state maintained a lie about one of its most documented atrocities against a neighboring nation, and the families of the victims were required to accept that lie as official reality. Number 17. Stalin's personal reading habits and intellectual engagement were genuine and extensive, a fact that complicates simple characterizations of him as merely a brutal thug. His personal library, preserved and catalogued after his death, contained approximately 20,000 books, many of them heavily annotated in his handwriting. He read widely across history, philosophy, literature, and political theory. He had a genuine engagement with Georgian poetry and culture. He corresponded with writers, made decisions about which literary works would be published or suppressed, personally reviewed and sometimes edited films before their release, and considered himself a significant intellectual figure in the Marxist tradition. The combination of genuine intellectual engagement with the specific decisions documented in the archival record is one of the most disturbing aspects of his biography. This was not a thoughtless man who did terrible things without understanding them. Number 18. The last years of Stalin's rule were marked by a new wave of paranoia that historians have described as potentially pointing toward a further major purge. The Doctor's Plot of 1952 and 1953, in which a group of predominantly Jewish doctors were accused of plotting to kill Soviet leaders through deliberate medical malpractice, was accompanied by a significant increase in anti-Semitic rhetoric in Soviet public life, and by what multiple historians, including Amy Knight and Jonathan Brent, have interpreted as preparations for a major new operation targeting the Soviet Jewish population and potentially other groups. Stalin died of a stroke on March 5, 1953, before whatever he was planning reached its final form. Whether his death prevented a new purge comparable in scale to 1937 and 1938 is a historical question that the archival evidence cannot resolve with certainty, but the trajectory of events in his final months pointed in a direction that those who survived him found deeply alarming. Number 19. The circumstances of Stalin's death on March 5, 1953, have been examined by historians and raise questions that the available evidence does not fully resolve. He suffered a stroke on the night of March 1st to 2nd, 1953, in his dacha at Kuntsevo. The documented timeline of events indicates that his guards did not enter his private quarters to check on him for an extended period after he failed to appear at his normal hour, and that when they did enter and found him collapsed on the floor, there was a further delay before senior party members were summoned and before medical assistance was provided. Nikita Khrushchev, in his memoirs, acknowledged that the members of the Politburo who gathered at the dacha did not rush to secure immediate medical treatment. Whether the delays were the result of fear, of the specific culture of non-interference with Stalin's private space that years of terror had produced, or of something more deliberate, is a question that historians continue to discuss. He died on March 5, 1953, with the members of the Politburo present. Beria reportedly became jovial almost immediately after Stalin's death was confirmed. Khrushchev recorded that he wept, but was uncertain whether his tears were genuine. Number 20. Nikita Khrushchev's secret speech to the 20th Party Congress in February 1956, in which he formally denounced Stalin's cult of personality and catalogued a portion of his crimes, was one of the most consequential political speeches of the 20th century. It was secret only in the sense that it was delivered in closed session. Copies were distributed to party organizations throughout the Soviet Union and to foreign communist parties, and its contents became widely known within weeks. The speech shocked millions of people who had genuinely believed the official version of Stalin's historical role. It produced political crises in Poland and Hungary. It initiated a process of de-Stalinization that continued, with interruptions, across the following decades. And it still did not tell the full story. The crimes that Khrushchev described in 1956 were real, but they were a fraction of the documented reality that the archives would subsequently reveal. The full accounting of what Stalin did and what it cost is still being assembled from the documentary record, decades after his death, from archives that are once again becoming less accessible as the political climate in Russia shifts. The man who was born Joseph Jugashvili in a small Georgian town in 1878, who changed his name to Stalin, the man of steel, who ruled one of the largest countries on earth for nearly 3 decades, who shaped the course of the Second World War and the Cold War, and whose decisions directly or indirectly determined the fate of tens of millions of human beings, was not a figure of simple evil. He was something more disturbing than that. He was a man of genuine intelligence and genuine capability, who understood the mechanisms of power with extraordinary clarity, and who used that understanding without restraint or mercy in service of objectives that he appears to have genuinely believed were historically justified. He was a man who signed death warrants in the evening and watched movies at night. A man who destroyed his own family members with the same machinery he used to destroy his political enemies. A man who falsified the historical record with such thoroughness that the full truth of what he did is still being established, more than 70 years after his death. The archives do not lie the way he did, and what they reveal, document by document, signature by signature, is a reality that the name alone does not capture. This is what the name means when you look at what the man actually did.